Shalom and greetings, everyone. This may come as a shock to some of you out there that there seems to be a growing movement within Messianic Judaism to believe that Yeshua, aka Jesus, was a Pharisee. Yeah, well, that was a shock to me to find out that a lot of people are starting to believe this, that I've been friends with on Facebook. I've been in some debates on Facebook on this topic, and so this topic, if it grows and continues to grow, will give Messianic Judaism a bad name. Well, as if it didn't have a great name already, but it's going to get worse. The reputation for inaccuracy. If we're going to get a bad reputation for accuracy, that's one thing, and to be persecuted for his name's sake. But to be inaccurate, well, let's make sure we're not jumping to conclusions without hard evidence, without real evidence. I'm not talking about just hearsay evidence or circumstantial evidence or some doctrinal similarity evidence, but some real evidence to really prove, was Yeshua, aka Jesus, a Pharisee? And well, we can see in Scripture that he's called a rabbi. Nicodemus in John chapter 3 and some of the other Pharisees, and many of the Pharisees, yes, did accept Yeshua, as far as we can find in evidence, more than the Sadducees. Yes, we can see that. But is that evidence? Some Pharisees may have thought that Yeshua was a Pharisee at that time because he seemed to agree more with some of the doctrines of the Pharisees versus the Sadducees. But, you could talk to Sadducees or modern day Sadducees. They call themselves Karaites. And Nehemiah Gordon is one of the most famous ones in the world, scholarly Hebrew scholar arena. And when he reads the book of Matthew, he says, whoa, this Yeshua, Jesus, is far more Sadducee than Pharisee. I think he even thinks he's a Sadducee, or was one, because Karaite means scripture alone, and they reject the oral law, or we say halakha as well, even just the whole thing. But, I'm not saying that he rejected the whole oral law. I'm not going to try to say that he was in 100% agreement with oral law, and I'm sure it's okay to have customs and traditions. And I think our Creator likes diversity in customs and traditions and races and skin colors and languages even that have developed around this world. He loves us all, but once we start making them equal or higher in rank or authority, or judging other people based upon them as being righteous or not, well, this is where we step on dangerous ground, as we're warned 5 times in the Tanakh to not add to the Scriptures or take away from them. And we have to be real careful if we're going to start doing that. And so, again, I don't want to say that Yeshua taught against all oral law, but we find him rebuking quite a bit of it in the Gospels. And the Apostle Paul, aka Shaul, also rebuked some oral law as well. But I'm not going to get to that right now. Let's look at this rather than just cherry pick, some doctrines and find similarities. Even the Christians, of course, mainstream Christians read the gospel and say, well, he wasn't a Pharisee or a Sadducee. He was Christian, just like me. And so everyone finds identity, and we can cherry pick certain doctrines and come to the conclusion and say, whoa, he's just like whatever my beliefs are right now. And so what I propose to you is, let's be careful before we jump to big conclusions or get into titles and esteem, especially titles of esteeming with high ranks of authority that are not really found in here in the Word, or in, I would say, any kind of credible evidence here. And if there is any credible evidence to disprove anything I say in this video, please let me know. Post it on this video teaching respectfully, of course, as long as there's no name calling or derogatory terminology. I'll remove those, of course, but I allow other viewpoints and disagreements, and if you have more to support what I'm saying, please post that too. So I'm putting it out there in cyberspace, opening it up for even potential debate here on what I'm going to propose to you. But I have a sneaky feeling that this whole idea that Yeshua was a Pharisee, and with all the intellectual logic and the way they're convincing sincere believers of this, could potentially have anti-Semitic, or not, I shouldn't say anti-Semitic, but anti-missionary origins to it. And what I mean by that is, taking some baby steps toward denying Yeshua as being truly the perfect Mashiach that never contradicted himself, that the Brit Hadashah does not contradict itself. If it does, or if Yeshua seriously contradicts himself, well then, yeah, he could be just like another prophet, another Pharisee, or however we want to title him, another man out there, and not really the true son of Hashem. Son of God, as we say, or Son of Man, he calls himself as well in the scriptures. But not to get off into another topic or off the theme here. Let's continue forward here. That what I propose is he doesn't contradict himself, and we're going to see this. And I sincerely question and I sincerely challenge anyone who does say that he was a Pharisee. And as I have already, and again, I said don't just propose hearsay. I'll call you on the carpet if it's just hearsay or circumstantial evidence or common doctrinal evidence, as I also call it. For example, one of the biggest reasons I've heard some of these out there that say that Yeshua was a Pharisee is that, like I said earlier, he agreed more with the Pharisees' doctrines than the Sadducees. Well, I think I do too. Does that make me a Pharisee? I don't think so. I hope you can see that I'm not a Pharisee. I don't claim to be one. But I do believe I agree more with the Pharisees' doctrines. For example, as one person posted on Facebook to me, the Pharisees believed in the resurrection. Yeah, I know. And so did Yeshua. And we can see in the scriptures that a lot of the Sadducees didn't at that time. And now Nehemiah Gordon, a Karaite, claims that there were a lot of Sadducees in the first century who did, and there was diversity and disagreements even among the Sadducees. But that whether that be true or not doesn't matter. The Pharisees apparently believed in angels, and I guess the Sadducees didn't. I haven't noticed or seen that. But Yeshua believed in angels. We see a lot of that, and even rebellious angels we see as also aka known as demons. But notice this here. The Pharisees believed in following the Torah, following Moshe. Well, don't you think the Sadducees did too? Of course. But of course, some say, well, we're really following it and you're really not. And so we can point fingers, but sincerely, each group, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, believed that they were following Torah. They just had disagreements of their interpretations from it. After enough captivities and slaveries and coming out of that and building the second temple, there came to be some disagreements in how to actually interpret the scriptures, and that's why there was some diversity of Judaism even in the first century CE. Okay, Another comment I heard was, well, the Pharisees believed in bringing others into the covenant. Well, I agree with that too, and Yeshua did. And I think the Sadducees did. I don't know. I'm not sure about that myself. But again, like I said, I agree with all these doctrines. And that doesn't make me a Pharisee, so how can we just say that makes Yeshua a Pharisee? So far, that's the best evidence that I've seen, or at least that has been expressed to me. Now, if Yeshua was a Pharisee, I have 10 points that actually more so debunk that conclusion. A Pharisee, of course, was a badge of honor. It was a high ranking of being in Judaism at the time. Most of the Sanhedrin were Pharisees. And of course, Sadducees were in there too. And scribes, I suppose. Now, point number one. Point number one, Yeshua was a carpenter growing up. Now it says that in Matthew 13:55, and also in Mark chapter 6 and verse 3, if you want to check up on me. As it says here, I'll quote, when he went back during his ministry, and he goes back to his hometown area, and people said, "Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary?" Oh, sounds like he didn't have prestigious parents or an occupation. And according to scholars, a carpenter was so common, and one of the kind of like landscapers today, very common out there, or a janitor, is not a very high esteemed occupation. I don't think he came to try to elevate his status based on humans' terms of ranking people. He came as a carpenter. He was born in Bethlehem. And not just Bethlehem, but in a manger. In a manger. We see this in 3 scriptures in Luke chapter 2, in 3 verses, verses 7, verses 12, and verses 16, if you want to check up on me. Not a prestigious accommodation to be born in. And even today we might say, if someone doesn't shut the door, "What? Hey, you, were you born in a barn?" It's not a compliment to be born in a barn or a manger, even back in those days. But of course in Bethlehem, it was south of Jerusalem, and it was, of course, he was born during the fall festival of Sukkot, that time period. Which is why there was no vacancies in the inns at that time. It was a pilgrimage feast when he was born, not sometime in December, of course, as I think most of you out there know that. Let's see, that was point number 2, born in a manger. Point number 1, he was a carpenter. Point number 3, he did not have high-ranking, prestigious parents. And we see John the Baptist, his father was a priest, and we can see that he had a high, prestigious role and title, but not Yeshua's parents. If there is, like I said, prove it to me with some hard evidence. Point number 4, he grew up in Nazareth. Now, Nazareth is up north. And of course, most of you know the reasons why he had to move up north, because of King Herod trying to kill the babies when they heard a king was born, and very similar to Moshe. This is another reason he was a prophet like unto Moshe or Moses. And so eventually he heads up to Nazareth. We see this in Luke chapter 2, verse 39. And this was among the lowliest of regions. As it says in John, in Yochanan chapter 1, and in verse 46, when one of his disciples was being called, was it Philip or someone? He said, and they heard he's from Nazareth. They said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Again, not trying to come into it. He could have been born in Jerusalem, among a high-ranking family in the Sanhedrin. Oh, wasn't, was he? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Quite the opposite of a compliment here. We're trying to establish credibility according to men's terms, or even in terms of Judaism at the time. Now, he was also considered a Galilean, because he spent a lot, and of course Nazareth is kind of between the Sea of Galilee, inland from the Mediterranean, about right in the middle. We got over in the east, we have the Sea of Galilee, and somewhere about in the middle there, you can look at any Israeli map of Israel today, and you can see that he was a Galilean. Now, Galilee, it was Aramaic was one of the dominant languages at the time, and most of you know that Hebrew, the biblical Hebrew, was the educated ones, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, those who were educated and highly esteemed and highly educated, spoke, the holy language of Hebrew. But Aramaic was more of a poor Hebrew's dialect that had digressed from the educated form of Hebrew. And so him being from Galilee was, generally speaking, more of a less educated, not quite as a high level of English or Hebrew-speaking territories, and more poverty, of course. That would come and play with being less educated as well. Being a carpenter, it wasn't, like I said, a very wealthy, or they didn't have a lot of power tools and had all this cool tool times, way of doing carpentry and construction, and it's more prestigious today, of course, but 2,000 years ago it wasn't so. And it wasn't a very wealthy occupation either, as far as I know. Now, his original disciples, point number 6, is his original disciples were considered uneducated. We see this with Peter and John, or Yochanan. In Acts chapter 4, verse 13, they were considered, these uneducated people. How are they doing these things? Paul, of course, was a Pharisee. We see a lot of evidence that he was a Pharisee. And God called him out of that group to kind of go into that group of highly educated ones who knew all the Hebrews and all the prophecies and knew the Torah inside and out, memorized it, probably forward and backwards. And so God will call people from every group and every tongue and every culture and every nation eventually to be a good witness to their own people, their own kind, to be a better influence, of course. But his disciples, look at the foundation, the 12 apostles, lowly occupations. Tax collectors were not considered an elevated, especially in terms of Judaism at the time, not such a elevated occupation of status quo and greatness and high reputation, fishermen, and so forth. So that's point number 6. Point number 7 here is Yeshua. He wasn't very good looking physically. As much as these pictures have tried to portray him, long hair, Gentile looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, so handsome he'd stand out in a crowd. Well, why did he have to be betrayed with a kiss by Judas? Because they couldn't even discern which one was him in a crowd. I'm not saying he was ugly looking, so ugly that he would stand out in a crowd, but my conclusion, and many conclusions out there are the same from other people out there, that yes, he was your common looking Jew at the time, wouldn't stand out in a crowd, had to be betrayed with a kiss. But notice, not just that, but Isaiah, Yeshayahu, we say in Hebrew, chapter 53, verses 1 and 2 here. It says, "Who has believed our report?" Who's going to believe this? "And whom has the arm of the Holy name here, the Yud-He Vav-He, the Creator, has revealed. For he shall, and this is referring to, we're getting into a messianic prophecy. Of course, Isaiah 53 is forbidden in modern times to be even read in the synagogues today, and there's a very good reason when you understand the grammar and the Hebrew of it, like the Jewish people who speak Hebrew fluently. It's hard to just say, well, this is Israel here. But notice here, it says, verse 2, for he shall grow up before him, referring to somebody special is going to grow up before Hashem as a tender plant and as a root out of dry ground. Now, roots out of dry ground are not very, probably not very healthy looking as far as like vibrant and wonder, wow, this is great, I want this. Usually not so good looking, probably physically appearance-wise. But it continues here. He has no form or comeliness. And when we see him, there is no beauty, no handsomeness that we should desire him. Now, can't say that about Israel. I mean, Israel has always been handsome, and people covet that land today. Even look how much everybody wants that land. Of course, during Mark Twain's time, it had become a desolated wilderness, but when the Jewish people own that land, it is beautiful. It's always thriving and blessed, unless, he wants to bring down some chastening for disobedience and drifting from Torah. But he's got reasons for everything that happens, and we don't always know why. But here it says that the Messiah will have no beauty that we should desire him. So he didn't try to come in a way that would just would influence people by his looks, by his wealth, by his appearance, by his education, by his occupation. In every way, point number 8 here is Philippians chapter 2, verse 7. It says, but made himself of no reputation. He didn't try to come to establish a badge of honor as a Pharisee to try to influence people to accept him. No. How did he do it, if he did it? Well, let me finish here. Philippians 2:7, taking the form of a bondservant. A bondservant, like a slave. Not a badge of honor here, not a Pharisee, and coming in the likeness of men, not your common men, not some highly elevated, educated Pharisee or Sadducee or like most people would say, a church father, but something that, well, how did he establish himself? Well, notice this. Not in ways that we would want to as a human to try to prove our credibility to people. Look at Luke chapter 2 and verse 40. It says, and the child, this is referring to Yeshua, a.k.a. Jesus. Here it says, the child grew and became strong in spirit, strong and filled with wisdom. And we see wisdom there. Go back to Proverbs 8. Wisdom was even there from the beginning with him, creating all these things. And of course we see the Word, we see wisdom becoming flesh, of course, and this is what we're talking about. And the grace of the Almighty here was upon him. That's all he needed. He didn't need to prove himself on human terms of wealth or prestige. He did it all not by man-made might or power or titles of greatness, but by his Spirit. He did it. He did all that he did. So, point number 10, that was point number 9. He grew and strong in spirit and wisdom. Point number 10 is a question for you here. Why have a Pharisaic badge of honor? why become a Pharisee with all those 9 previous points? Again, I need some good evidence, not hearsay, not common doctrinal evidence or circumstantial evidence, but real, true evidence. Like I said, Pharisees, they were the majority in the Sanhedrin at the time of Jewish leadership and hierarchy and greatness. Very prestigious, high reputations. Elders, they are considered elders, sages, rebbes, rabbis, etc. And again, we do see him accepted as a rabbi, a great teacher, because of his great wisdom, not because of a degree or going through some man-made education of the Torah and oral law. But, we see it. We don't see him trying to establish this badge of honor anywhere. Like I said, if you can prove it otherwise, me wrong in any of this, please do. I'm open for correction. I want to be meek, but meekness doesn't mean weakness, does it? So I'm going to stand strong with the truth until proven wrong. Now, another misunderstanding, and I'm going to go into a part 2 of this and make kind of a 2-part playlist, because another misunderstanding among what I call Pharisaic Messianic Jews, who have a lot of patriotic Pharisaic pride, as I also say, the PPP, there's Pharisaic or patriotic Pharisaic pride, and there's also super Sadducean supremacy, the 3 S's, and we shouldn't have either of those, but have the right balance, and of course respect culture, respect tradition, as long as it's not trying to be elevated to be equal or higher than the written Torah. And it's good as long as it doesn't have pagan origins and doesn't go against the written Torah. What could be wrong with it? We all have culture and we all have traditions, no matter whether you're religious or not. There's traditions and daily routines. We're creatures of habit. We like to do a lot of the same things, and whether they be religious or not. So I'm not trying to put things down and just say that things are evil when there's some goodness to it, especially if it helps us to glorify or draw closer to Him in a traditional way. But again, notice I'm going to get into this in part 2, but a relative misunderstanding is in Matthew, and also among Christians. I'm not just saying against Pharisaic Messianic Jews here, but I'm talking about Christians as well, because of the English translations, and I'm going to get to the original language and the words and break it down for you in this next video teaching. But just a quote, Matthew 23 verses 1 through 3 here. It says, "Then Yehoshua, aka Jesus, spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat." Verse 3, "Therefore, whatever," key word here, whatever, "they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do." Now, it sounds like it's just talking about hypocrisy. People say, oh, this is only talking about hypocrisy. It's not talking about oral law. It's not talking about the oral law, the Jewish oral law. Well, like I said, stay tuned for part 2. We'll see the halakha in here, which is also the Jewish oral law. We're going to see at least bits and pieces of it. Again, I'm not saying it's all bad. Of course, not all Pharisees are bad either. I'm not trying to say that. A lot of them were good. A lot of them did accept Yeshua as Messiah. So please don't get me wrong. I'm not just trying to bash and put anybody down too much here. But on the surface of this English language in our translations, there has been some mistranslation. And I'm going to get to that in the next video teaching. I'm titling that one, "Whatever the Pharisees Say."